So when I think of creationism, right, I mean, I separate that there are two sort of echelons of biblical thinking, two major realms of biblical thinking. I'll put it at that. There's one that considers the text of the Bible to be literal, and there's one which considers it to be more metaphorical. And this group is more lenient with cherry picking and things of that nature as to what has contemporary value in the Bible and what is perhaps maybe a little bit outdated. So you have these two types of biblical thinking. Now, the latter I would identify much more with, and the former I think is a vast misinterpretation of biblical text. One could argue that the story of the Garden of Eden is in fact a metaphor for the dawn of the agricultural revolution and humanity's pursuit of knowledge, which burdens us with the enslavement of daily labor, 9 to 5, farming. Now, that's one hypothesis which was really sort of exemplified in Daniel Quinn's Ishmael, which is a great book. I recommend it. The problem that I come across quite a bit with biblical literalists is creationism. And that is a very difficult conversation to have because creationists do not have any sort of leniency in their beliefs regarding the origins of reality as a whole and the origins of humanity, which is problematic when you want to have a conversation. I had one conversation with a friend of mine who is a creationist, and we talked for hours, and it ended with her saying, John, at the end of the day here, I will never convince you of creationism, as you will never convince me of evolution. And I turned to her and I said, well, no, that's where you're wrong. You could very well convince me of creationism if you had ample evidence for creationism, but you don't, and nobody does. Therefore, you haven't had me convinced. But that's really the separation here. That's where the cognitive dissonance appears to become more evident. There's a disconnect, and that's where blind faith comes in, which I think is an ingenious human trait that has certainly accomplished quite a bit over our 300,000 year tenure on this planet, and certainly in the last 12,000. But the prospect of faith in itself at times can be blinding. And this is a case where I would argue it was incredibly blinding to this friend of mine, who just couldn't understand the concept of being open-minded to these kinds of things and new data and integrating that new data into your current worldview. But there's one thing that I like to say to creationists often, and it really sort of sums it up. So if God created us in his image, and he also created the entirety of physicality and reality, then why is it that every rock you can turn over, every animal you can dissect, every leaf you can examine, every cellular, molecular structure you can look at, why is it that every single one of these aspects of the physical reality around us points in one direction, undoubtedly, unbiasedly, in one direction? Why is that? Well, maybe they would say that the devil is planting fossils. The devil is making it appear as if we evolved. But if that's the case, then the devil would have to be literally everywhere and in every single thing that exists. And at that point, this isn't God's world, this is the devil's world. Because every single atom you can examine, that you can scrutinize, can be traced back to a single point at the Big Bang. And we can do that here. We can look at the red shifting, the blue shifting of galaxies. We can look at things like the laryngeal nerve, which is precariously stretched around the neck of a giraffe, when in reality it needs to go from point A to point B, which is a very short distance. But because of the sculpting of variations over millions of years, the giraffe's neck grew and couldn't turn back to the drawing board and start from scratch. That's not how evolution works. It must work with what it has, thus slowly sculpting these variations and mutations over eons and eons of time. So if this reality is something which is was created in an instant like that, which I also think is a metaphorical reference in the Bible, which was not meant to be taken literally, but let's just say it is. If that is the case, then did God really do a poor job of trying to make it look as if that's the case? Because everything looks as though that is not the case at all. There's deep time. Deep time has existed. It's always existed since the Big Bang, as far as we know. And it is something which is so difficult for our human minds to comprehend that we have to come up with these radical explanations that are just not applicable to the real world. That being said, though, always keep an open mind and always be open to integrating new data into your worldview, because that is the best way to reduce bias and to incorporate a wide variety of perspectives. And I think that's a good thing to strive for. At any rate, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.